Well, hello, hello. Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you all for coming back and saying hello to us again. I hope you had a lovely break and are ready for more archaeological wonders in 2025. Thanks for joining us tonight. This is the seventh in our series. 7 months we've been doing this now, Jacob. Of exclusive online talks for the Kent Archaeological Society. It's a new year, so we should be experienced professionals by now, and we hope to avoid any technical issues, but please do bear with us if there are any glitches in the system. Jacob, all fresh and excitable from 2025, is as ever lurking in the background to help us navigate the ocean of technological terrors should they arise. If you're not a member of the Society, then please do think about joining us. It works out at about £3.30 a month. For that, you'll receive a copy of our yearly journal, Archaeologia Cantiana, full of the most current historical and archaeological research in the county. You'll also receive our biannual magazine, regular newsletters, exclusive access to our collections, conferences and selected events, opportunities to get involved in excavations and research projects, and you'll allow us to keep putting out content such as these free online talks. We do outreach in schools, community groups and seminars, all of which we hope brings the benefit of Kent archaeology and history to everybody. Check the website for details on how you can become a member, or email us on any of the contact details that we have distributed. And Jacob will surely put in the chat somewhere for us. Okay, let's start. Oh, we'll just check that everyone can hear me okay. Is there echo with more people? If anyone can say in the chat if there's a bit more echo. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. All right, so housekeeping. The talk will last for around an hour, after which we will have time for questions if you should have any. Please, could we all keep ourselves on mute with our cameras off throughout the talk so that we can hear our speaker clearly. During the Q&A, you can either use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you when it's your turn to ask the question personally, or if you'd prefer, you can type your question into the chat box and I will read it out for you. I hope it goes without saying, but please be courteous and polite to our speaker and to each other. We will be recording the session and it may be posted to our video channels in the future, but no personal data will be shared. And if you ask a question but would prefer it not to be published, just send us an email and we'll make sure that it's not on there. So, the boring bits out of the way, on to our speaker. Dr. Rebecca Ellis-Haken is a Postdoctoral Research Associate at the University of York and an archaeologist specialising in artefact studies and small finds photography of artistic representation created during the European Iron Age. Like many of us, Reb was drawn to archaeology after catching episodes of Time Team, and her passion was cemented following involvement in a community archaeology project in Leeds as a teen. Reb obtained her first-class undergraduate degree in archaeology and heritage studies from the University of Worcester and completed an MA in archaeology at the University of Bradford. She pursued a PhD at the University of Hull, which focused on the use of genuinely figurative animals in the Latin period art of England and Wales, circa 400 BC to AD 100s. Reb has over 15 years experience taking part in and running community archaeology projects and has been involved in many fieldwork projects, including activities with the Roman Roads Research Association. She worked for the Portable Antiquities Scheme as a finds liaison assistant and continues to advise the scheme on animal and human figurative finds of the period. Alongside a general interest in art and artifact studies from the Neolithic to the Roman periods, Reb's research explores changes and use of both abstract and figurative art and its social role in mid to late Iron Age Britain and the near continent. Her important work gives a voice back to the populations that have been long overshadowed by the Roman Empire. I should admit at this point that I am a huge fan of Reb's work, and I have watched many of her incredible talks online, which you can find just search YouTube and you'll see them. And I would say they are all definitely worth checking out. And she has many in the pipeline, so I hear. So away from archaeology, I also hear Reb is a keen baker, an amateur cricket ace, and a dog lover. So we're really pleased and excited that she's here to talk with us tonight. Reb, over to you.
Oh, there we go. Hello, thank you. I really have to live up to that now. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. I'm just waiting to be allowed to share my screen, and then I will carry on. There we go. Can I just have confirmation everybody can see that nice and clear? Have I got a thumbs up anywhere? Can everybody see that okay? Oh, yep, all good. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yeah, I can't really say any more to that. I think so I'm here this evening to talk about the animals and humans in the late Iron Age art of England and Wales, with specific reference to Kent. And I like to describe this area of material culture studies as the dark side of Iron Age material culture studies specifically. And what I like to do with these talks is to make sure we start and make sure we're all singing off the same hymn sheet in regards to time and space. So the Iron Age of Europe is traditionally split into two phases, the earlier Hallstatt and the latter La Tène. Now in Europe, La Tène art starts at about 450 BC and continues through until Caesar violently gallivants through Gaul during the Gallic Wars of the mid-1st century BC. Now, the dates in Britain are a little bit different. Here it is traditionally taught that the Iron Age starts a tad later, 400 rather than 450 BC. And despite being visited by Caesar, we continue relatively independently, but not unaffected by what's going on in Gaul until the 1st century AD and the Claudian invasion. However, I want you to remember that plenty of local practices continued after both visit and invasion. And just as quite a few aspects of Roman art actually in influence were actually adopted before Claudius came to the shore as well. This is really a period of a hugely complex melting pot of ideas, and hopefully you will get a sense of that by the end of the talk this evening. And to clarify, early Celtic art and La Tène art are two names for exactly the same thing. They're the art belonging to the second half of the Iron Age. There's a reason I don't tend to use the Celtic identity moniker, and that will hopefully become clear in a moment. This is a genuinely pan-European art style. You can find La Tène art as far west as Ireland and also see it as far east as Turkey. And basically, there's a traditional narrative as to how it came about, but it's a little bit tricky. So the traditional narrative is that in the 5th century BC, there was a state collapse in Central Europe around what was called the Hallstatt zone. So yeah, okay, so southern Germany, Austria, etc. And many of you will have probably heard of the Hallstatt salt mines. It's that kind of area. And from large movements of people north and west, and archaeologically, and this is in the 5th century BC broadly, and archaeologically, these people become visible through their burials first and foremost, with the introduction of the two-wheeled chariot vehicle, just like those that are buried over in East Yorkshire, although a little bit earlier. A large focus on male-dominated warrior identities, although some communities did continue to be matrifocal. It depends on where you were. Lots of weapons and lots of feasting equipment, much of which was decorated in a new curvilinear flowing art style that had not really been seen before, and that is La Tène art. Now, Greeks called these populations many names. Celts, which actually derives from the Greek Celt, a very useful moniker. They did mention specific names of people such as the Galatai, who may have been up in the Marne region. Change as early as the 6th century BC, a full 100 years earlier than the traditional narrative. And therefore, this change in art may not be related to political collapse or to the movements of these peoples. And therefore, it may not have ever had a strong connection to this idea of Celtic. And that is why I feel it's safer to call it Latin art, i.e. art belonging to the second half of the Iron Age, rather than Celtic art, i.e. belonging to a particular people. So what is Latin art? Well, Latin art is used to decorate a variety of materials, including stone, bronze, glass. It's also embellished with, I was about to say enamel later on, chanpleave enamel technique. It also decorates gold, bone, and pottery. And we think it may have been used as a style sequence to be used as body paint. There's the idea of tattooing. And also we think some designs may have gone into textiles, but unfortunately that kind of evidence just doesn't continue to survive in the archaeological record, particularly in Britain. Here on the left, we have a very nice pedestal urn from France from the 4th century BC. Is it the 4th century BC? Yes, it is. I got it right. And though we do find some Latin pottery in the UK, namely Dragonby and the Glastonbury Lake Village settlements, it's never as nice as this, unfortunately. Our pottery has a long way to go. But you can see that painted curvilinear design. But it can differ quite markedly. Although there are some set symbols and motifs, the way they can be executed can differ. In the middle here, we have the Kirkburn sword, decorated with both incised patterns along the main scabbard just here, but also decorated with infilled red glass cells. This was discovered in East Yorkshire in the Kirkburn warrior burial. And it's argued that when you would have held this sword, when it would have been brand new, and you were in the sunlight, with the red enamel and the golden looking brassy finish of the bronze, it would have looked like your hand was dripping in blood. This has been written about by a few people, including Mel Giles. And this is actually the finest decorated sword in the entirety of Iron Age Europe. And so what this is telling us is that Latin art is not just about complexity of decoration, it's about social effect. And that's the hardest evidence we can try and find and uncover, but it's something we've always got to be mindful of when it comes to art. And it was found actually in the burial of a young man. I can't remember the pathological, the osteoarchaeological report regarding why he died, but it was interesting because the sword was actually older than him. The sword was an heirloom item, but yet chosen to be buried with him. So some fine uses of Latin art later on, and in this instance, such as the use of glass. Recent studies have shown that actually the use of glass beads and the use of the creation rather of glass bangles is a very late Iron Age technological innovation. It doesn't just come over with the Romans, it's a little bit earlier than that. And actually Glastonbury is a big, or the Glastonbury area is a big big area for that. But some of you, as you look at these beads, will notice that actually those spiral the book of well, the truth is that elements of Latin art as to how or why are the subject of another lecture, and quite frankly, it needs a lot more research. The art style is known as abstract and iconic and mysterious. That is what you will read about if you read most big Latin art books in the last 20 years. Not that there's many in Britain. It is predominantly a style of abstract pattern, normally curvilinear in overall form. And this is seen very much in contrast to the preceding Hallstatt art, which was mostly geometric in shape. These two pieces are perhaps some of the most famous pieces of Latin art from the UK. And if you visit the Iron Age and Roman Gallery in the British Museum, which, you know, you guys are not as far away as I am. I'm beaming to you all the way from North Yorkshire. I don't get to visit as much as I would like to. If you go to the gallery, you will see these on display. And on the right, we have the Battersea Shield, which continually covers textbooks on Celtic art and other Iron Age subjects in this country, which is slightly ironic because stylistically it's a complete pain in the backside. It doesn't actually fit our typologies particularly well. But what it does bring is this notion of the importance of art in deposition. This was a river deposition. We do have importance of deposition in watery places from certainly 2000 BC onwards, if not earlier. In fact, much earlier. You know, always get to the specifics of that, but there is this greater social weight to them. It's a shield. We have weaponry to consider. There's always been this argument that the late Iron Age, there is a definite warrior class, and art is an important part of their regalia. But we have art of varying scales, it's not just about warrior and display. When you look at the Snettisham Great Talk, particularly here where I've just blown up the terminal end, here, you know, some of these basket-shaped, it's called basket pattern. Some of these little hammered marks here, they're not 3 millimeters long and they're about 1 millimeter wide. And you've got to remember that this is being done with sheet gold and no modern magnifiers. Like, this is going to ruin people's eyes. And this makes us ask the question about, well, there is art that's public, and obviously, you know, it's a gold neck ring. It's a big public statement, but only really the person who made this or who handled this probably in wearing it was going to see that fine detail. And so art can work on several levels. It may not have one role, it could have several, and that makes our job a little bit more difficult in trying to ascertain what's going on with it and what it's being used for. For talks, I can really recommend Tess Matchling and Roll Williams' bigbookoftalks.com, open access research. If you're interested in Iron Age Gold Talk, go and have a look. But the one, just because things are high status, the top of their class, or in very high status contexts, it doesn't actually mean they're always decorated. There's a choice to decorate that we don't fully understand the mechanisms of yet. Excellent examples here from the Winchester Hoard bracelet, absolutely 1st century BC bracelet. As you'll come to learn later on, the 1st century BC and AD, big boom in art production, both abstract and figurative. This is gold, yet it's entirely plain. So we can't just expect decoration to occur. The same goes for pottery as well, both imported and domestic, as we see from the Prospect Place burial from Welwyn Garden City here, one of the richest tombs in Britain. Pottery is very lovely. Have to remember, and the only art that's ongoing at this point, we're looking at societies that date to before the Roman period, that there's this notion of prehistoric individuals with their roundhouses, eyes, blocking out their ears, and this idea of kind of cultural enlightenment, this very primitivist idea. It's just not true. The Iron Age, just like the Bronze Age before it, is an incredibly cosmopolitan time period. But lots we have decoration style and from Castle Field, which is derived from the Bronze Age all the way through, even if the objects themselves don't necessarily. You'll often sometimes see ring and dot motif. Some people will claim it as, oh, it's definitely early medieval. Oh, it's not. It is not a diagnostic motif. It has a ridiculously long life. And then when we look at the coinage, and I'm aware, so I'm going to explain this very briefly because he is the expert on this. But influence of art can be seen in our coinage. So the first bronze minted country is minted by the communities in Kent, as you will probably already know, the Canti or Cantiani.
Hi, Reb. I'm so sorry. We're getting some connection issues. Could you try turning off your video? In fact, I'm going to try turning off your video.
Similar coins are also produced by oblums. Yeah, not a problem. Yeah, there you go. Well, let's move that over there. Okay, so
thank you, and then I'll make you host again.
Time. Oh yeah. There we go. Thank you. Consultation. Yeah. Now, the Canti are not the only group that mint these. There's a few groups in gold from La Tène whatsoever derive and are copied by bronze coins minted by the city-state of Massalia, modern-day Marseille, all the way down on the Mediterranean coast. And that is actually, believe it or not, the design inspiration for these coins, if in a very reduced fashion. Whereas later gold coinage, etc., does follow La Tène art styles.
Sorry again, Reb. We couldn't see your screen. Did you try to share the screen? It might be that you have to have your video on to share the screen.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. I'm going to make you host again, and then we'll go through again. Okay. There you go.
Thank There we go. Sorry. Yes, you're right. Right. Roll. Okay.
Still can't see it yet.
Oh. Okay.
Oh, there you
It
go.
is saying that. Have we got it? Yep.
Yeah, it's coming through, I think. So you might have to select on the window to select. That's it. We can see it. That's great. Thank you.
You can see it. Right. Perfect. Thank you, folks. Right. There we go. So yes. So individuals in Kent are clearly trading in a network that includes the city-state of Mastalia. And Kentish potens have a really unusual distribution because you see them all over the country, whereas future Iron Age coins you actually tend to see in a more regional basis. So that's why they're really interesting. And that gives and the opportunity to get funding, I would call. I was kind of reading the textbooks about, this art style being abstract and iconic, all these different meanings, abstract psychological effects. But yeah, in the textbooks, like this on the human form. They took the living subject as that, or what people wanted to do. And so for my PhD, I was very lucky to then discuss this a bit more. And I wasn't the only one to think there was something, including Green, had also come up with many theories. And so there's quite a few species that have or have sort of been talked about more than others, and here are just a few. We have porcines, wild boars more specifically, and whether they're found in France, Britain, the Czech Republic, wherever, in the Iron Age, there's always this notion that they are the epitome of the warrior symbol, as though their ferocity is what is the ideal totem, the ideal personality trait for warriors, for their aggression, for this warrior class. And this comes mainly and is argued mainly through their use on helmets and also their depictions on swords and their depictions on helmets as well. We actually have images such as on the Gunderstrup cauldron of individuals with decorated helmets, including a bird and also a porcine. Horses are another really key example here. Now, horses are always thought to be the symbols of kings. And the reason this is so prevalent, particularly in Britain, is because horses decorate 19th century BC, late 1st century BC, early 1st century AD more directly. Here's a very early example in the middle that was actually minted in the Somme Valley over the Channel and then imported into Britain. It's some of the earliest gold coinage imported into Britain. And you can see a horse is clearly present. But does that then mean that if a horse decorates another item, such as a bucket or a brooch, that item also has? Does that mean that what's actually going on is that horses have one meaning on coinage as one group of material culture, and that other items, when they're decorated with horses, that there is a different meaning? Because often there is this notion that whatever animals represent on coins is the same in wider art. It's a kind of just given that they're symbolical, that representatively what they represent, that there's this twin effectively, that there's no difference. And actually I wanted to test that idea out. Corvids are another example where we do have a lot, particularly in the early medieval literature, written about corvids, their association with the Morrigan in Irish legend, but also their association in other early medieval culture regarding particularly Odin and his corvids Hugin and Mjolnir, thought and memory. Yet here we have a bucket fitting, apologies for the photo, not my photo, the best I can get at the minute. We have here a human who has uneven eyes, definitely a bucket no later than the early 2nd century AD, in the Iron Age style, and he doesn't actually have horns around the back of his head. He actually has corvids. They are actually corvids with eyes and very rounded beaks. And sort of this makes us question, well, how old are some of these ideas, but also how much can we really think about literature? And so for me, for the PhD, for the study, for all this work that this is based on, all my work in this and what I am not talking about, which is actually the idea of identifying the figurative amongst the abstract. There's been a lot of talk about very abstract pieces of art and arguing what they represent. Mount from the Isle of Anglesey, from the excavations that took place in RAF Station Valley in the 1940s, huge amount of material you can name down in Cardiff. And this group of shapes over the years has been called several things. In 1958, it was described by box, a pattern to represent particularly anything. Just for several in 2000, but both before and after that, it's been described as. I don't understand why, given the head shape and that really broad beak shape.
Sorry, we're still having quite bad problems with it. If I every time I raise my hand, if it pops up on your screen, would you be able to just repeat the last 5 seconds or so worth of what you were saying? Is that possible? Because it's becoming quite difficult to follow.
Oh God, I don't believe it's so bad. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'll.
I can't think of anything else really to suggest. Apologies.
The storm that's coming. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will. Can I try and move it? Just give me 2 seconds. I'm going to see if I can move.
Okie dokie.
Right, do that. Right. I'm going to move closer to the router in the hope that this is going to work. Right, shift that. Right, okay. Are you okay if I try and share again? Oh, excuse me a moment. There we go. That happens to be the husband's mobile going off. Oh, it's one of those days today, isn't it?
It's no problem. I was just going to say, I can't speak when you're the host, which is the problem. So I apologise. I can't respond. But if I make you the host, and I'm listening. So if you request anything, I can take control again. Okay.
That's fine. No worries. Yep. Sorry about this, folks.
Let's make you host again.
Thank you. There we go. Share. Oh. Right. There we go. So you should be able to see that. So I will just check on chat. If somebody can give me a thumbs up or you can see that. All good. Thank you. Right. Hopefully this will be better. I will close that. Right. So as I was saying, puffins in the Iron Age. Fun one. This notion that E.M. Joke came up with, and he wasn't the only one, and actually it's been written about quite extensively throughout the period. Thank you for that. Apologies, you're probably seeing the chat as well. I'm just checking that we're all okay. There we go. So yes, but then also later on in 2018, Mansell Spratling explained that, maybe this is the whole thing, so not just the highlighted area, but the whole thing could actually also represent a highly abstracted running quadruped. But here's the thing. This is where I want to go back to data, because actually this grammar of ornament is not unique at all. And actually, when you look at artifacts, it can be seen on over 20 other artifacts from the British Iron Age. And what's really important about that is that what it actually shows is that we as archaeologists have been incredibly inconsistent in the way we have identified these patterns, but also in the ways that we have essentially interpreted them. Because if this is a puffin, as has been suggested in the past on the Luncatic Back Mount, What's a puffin doing on a slight variant of the same pattern on the linchpin from Kirkburn in East Yorkshire? What's it doing on a golden torque from Ipswich? What's it doing on a horncat from Saxthorpe? Like, what is the significance of this? We're not interrogating our own ideas enough. And because of that, although I discuss this in the PhD, I don't include these items as genuinely figurative depictions, because I genuinely don't believe that they are. So my PhD, very kindly funded through the Heritage Consortium, very simply was about going back to basics. It was about understanding how animals are used to decorate objects using a data-based approach. I was looking for correlations across several data facets, looking at factors such as object type, material used to decorate the animal, i.e. were there patterns in enamel colour for eyes? Were there patterns to species? Did certain areas prefer certain species? Or was this argument of pan-European homogeneity in art and its meaning genuinely true? Could we evidence what we were saying and what we've been saying for, quite frankly, the last 50 years? And then what I did as well was compare and contrast patterns of animal use to art in other areas of Irish society, i.e. mainly looking at how animals were used in faunal remains and faunal remain patterns, ritual deposits mainly. But that, believe it or not, did not throw up a huge amount of results, and therefore we're not going to really discuss that going forward. The other thing I will mention very briefly is that I did not look at coins, because apparently as a PhD student, you can do too much. And my poor PhD supervisor had trouble reining me in, shall we say. And so coins were not done as part of this. Coins are a separate discussion, which actually still need to be looked at. So what did my data look like? Well, I looked at 817 artifacts, and I immediately removed 258 because I couldn't identify them. And I couldn't identify them for a number of reasons. Either because they were not diagnostic enough to absolutely be considered part of the Latin art style. Either because I couldn't identify the animal because they were so stylistic. You know, when you're trying to do a data-based study, there's no point in trying to guess your way through, because you're just going to skew your data. You need to be confident in what you're saying about it. And in some cases, unfortunately, the items had just been hit by the tractor too many times to be able to be identified. So we removed those artifacts. I then had to remove the 118 humans because of the whole "you still can do too much for a PhD" thing. But I did keep humans like this very old pre-PAS find from Warwickshire, who is now in the States. We know exactly where he is. A human combined with animal horns. And interestingly, he's the only one of that particular style found in Britain, and he was probably made in Galla Belgica, but that's a whole other story. And so the final sample for the PhD I looked at was 441 animals that decorated 408 artifacts. And here's the really important thing. I took this number and then I compared it to the number of abstract and figurative, all Latin, data corpuses that had been published, which at that time was mainly the Technology of Enchantment from 2012. And I'm just making sure that I've got, yeah, that's fine. Sorry, I was just making sure that there was no issues on the chat there. And here's the thing. When you compare that number to the roughly 2,750 items of Latin art that were recorded in 2012, that tells you that percentage-wise, animal and human depictions could make up to about 20% of all Latin art in England and Wales. And that in itself tells you that there is some kind of production consistency going on here. 20% is a number that's significant. You can't just ignore that. And so instead of animals just being, and humans just being random or very much not thought about at all, this aniconic idea, this idea that Iron Age craftspeople were obsessed with the abstract rather than the figurative, this result really challenged that. And and the reason why these numbers are much bigger than what previous studies had done was because half of my data, 50% of my data, actually came from reported finds from the Portable Antiquity Scheme. And I'm forever grateful for those that reported their finds and for the FLOs, the officers of the scheme, who still even now get in touch with me about finds. Because without that data, we would not know this. We would not have changed the face of this as we have. Now, if we were in a room, I would normally open this out to the audience and say, you know, what species do you think, after everything I've gone through, bearing in mind we're not talking about coins, bearing in mind the questions I've asked, what species do you think is the most common? And the ones I often hear are horses is normally the most popular. followed by porcines. But in Britain specifically, admittedly, I should say Southern Britain, England and Wales, apologies, Scotland, the data is coming for Scotland when their treasure trove database comes online. And surprisingly, and this was a completely new finding at the time, bovines, so cows, we don't do gender specific here because cows of the Iron Age period, both male and female, had horns. So just because it's got horns doesn't mean it's male. We can't make those assumptions without other anatomical data. And bovines are the most popular animal. And literally, until I did this study and ended up publishing a paper on it in a Congress proceedings, you could not have found that fact in a textbook anywhere. It was a complete unknown. And this was really surprisingly followed by humans, whereas everybody's like, where are the horses? Like, where are they? Well, birds came next. Some lovely little things, including these little fittings, BD1A fittings, which are a brand new artifact typology. I've also done a typology of bucket fittings. Well, porcines came next, and some of the porcines are possibly not just from Britain either. This particular example from Essex, so not very far from you guys. The very horizontal nature of the nose and the very horizontal nature of the back actually tells us this was probably made in France and imported. And he's the only example we can say was probably imported in the 1st century BC. Then we have others. Now, the other category covers species that are not numerous enough to have their own categories. We have dogs. We've got caprids, so sheep/goat. You can't necessarily tell the difference in species. We, believe it or not, have felines. We have 2 felines. What else have we got? We've got a couple of snakes. What else have we got? We've possibly got a miniature bear from St Albans, would you believe? That's not a Roman bear. That is actually an Iron Age type bear, which could fit in quite nicely actually with the use of bear skins that actually were used to contain cremations in some of the Hertfordshire Welland burials. So, but that's a whole other lecture. And then right at the bottom were equines. Horses are only 5% of the national sample. And some of you may be thinking, well, yeah, this makes sense actually, because, you know, if they are kingly symbols, then yeah, they're not going to be commonly used. They're going to be really carefully controlled. And so you're not going to expect them decorating everything. Hold that thought and please don't kill me later when we go back to it. Now, when we looked at the national distribution of all finds, there's a bit of a problem. Because 50% of the data came from the Portable Antiquity Scheme, unfortunately, what we're seeing here are not genuine archaeological phenomenon. What we're actually seeing here is metal detecting survey, hence Norfolk, Lincolnshire, and parts of Hertfordshire and further north look a little bit like they're on fire. Brilliant reporting rates, like yay for reporting rates, but unfortunately that is the case. Therefore, we have to be a little bit careful about identifying distributions. However, when you break this data down into individual object types or individual species, some really interesting patterns begin to emerge. For instance, when you look at the national distribution of porcines, we have 3 really major hotspots. One up here in North Yorkshire, which is a very late one, 1st century AD, possibly to do around the Civitas of Aldborough. Really nice big group in Lincolnshire. Now, there is a bit of everything in Lincolnshire, but what's really interesting about this is that Lincolnshire, or rather the Corriol Tauvi, in northern Lincolnshire are the only group in Britain that mint a gold coin with another animal on it that isn't a horse, and it's actually porcines. And there's this high density of porcines. It's a nice collaboration, something that still needs to be looked at. Unfortunately, no porcines in Kent, but if you look to your neighbours in Sussex, look at this huge thing here. And what's really interesting about this huge spot of density here is that Sussex, Iron Age groups in Sussex, almost exclude all other species except porcines. And if you want to learn more about that without meaning to advertise another talk, but I'm going to do it shamelessly anyway, I'm actually talking about porcines in the Iron Age in Sussex next month, again via Zoom, and hopefully there won't be these connections problems that we've had this evening. So that was really one of the big finds of the PhD. We had not only regional preferences for the portrayal of certain species over others, we also have regionally specific artifact groups. Norfolk is a pain in my backside because there's about 4 of them in Norfolk. We also have some in Lincolnshire. We've got a couple in Wales. There's this separation. And so once again, this notion that art is this pan-European homogenous thing that's the same whether you're in France, whether you're in Britain, whether you're in Ireland, whether you're in Turkey. It's just not true. There's something very, very different going on here. But the other really important finding, and what's really important for the second half of this presentation, is the art production boom. between 100 BC and 100 AD, we have a massive figurative art boom alongside a general abstract one, but the figurative one is particularly noticeable. And this has absolutely nothing to do with Rome. I think there's always this assumption that something new like this, so close to that conquest period, must be something to, oh, they're imitating Rome and the use of classical art. They are not. Actually, the influences of this seem to come from Gallo-Belgica, so modern day Belgium. It's quite interesting, but a whole other lecture. But what's massively important is that within this figurative art boom, art seems to become a new political tool. And that is something we actually don't have evidence for in Britain until this point. And it's incredibly important for our spotlight onto Kent. So that was all the national kind of context. What's going on in Kent? I always like to start with numbers. And the numbers already tell me something not normal / unusual. I mean, there isn't a normal really in this, is there? Something slightly unusual is going on in Kent. And the reason something slightly unusual is going on is that humans actually, there are more human depictions in Kent than there are bovines. And it's the only region to do that. It's the only region in England and Wales where humans are more popular than any other species depicted. And that is weird. The lack of porcines is not so weird. The fact that bovines are up there and are nearly as popular helps. Yes, we're dealing with very small sample sizes, and that's always going to be an issue. But yeah, it is slightly unusual. Here is the spread of finds. That is Richborough. That is Maidstone, just to give, sorry, Maidstone? Yes, Maidstone. Just to give you a bit of reference. And you can see the general spread is down here. But I haven't, and then we've got something up in Richborough just under there as well. But unfortunately, I've not had the time yet to really look at the landscape connotations, but then there's so few finds, we're unlikely to get statistically significant results. To help us understand this a little bit better, let's have a look at some other regions, both near and far. And it really is that human result that really, once again, shows how strange it is compared to everything else. You can see how strange Sussex is. And I would like to say the additional numbers here are new finds, which are still going through the treasure process, as I understand at the minute. And porcines, though, you'll see that the lack of porcines is not unusual when you look at other mass-producing counties, such as Suffolk and Norfolk. So yeah, and you'll also notice equines, Kent's slightly unusual because you've actually got 2 examples of horses, whereas actually most places don't at all. Yes, on coins, but not on this wider art. And that brings us to the objects that horses decorate almost exclusively in Kent. And that is buckets. And the reason buckets are really important for this talk and for Kent is because actually it's what the buckets are used for, their contexts, their patterns, that actually tell you what's going on artistically in Kent and where the artistic influences are coming from. But to help with this, I'm just going to give you a little background to buckets in general. Buckets, which in this instance are wooden stave vessels, coopered together traditionally with iron coopering bands and occasionally decorated with interlapping copper alloy bands, as you can see here, are something that come along in the 1st century BC. They probably, in design and fashion, derive from slightly earlier burials out in Gallo-Belgica that start about 150 BC. Natalie Junot did a great paper on those in 2006. It's also where some of the imagery derives from, not all of it, but some of it. And in the 1st century BC in Britain, when they are within a burial context, they are exclusively within some kind of cremation burial. Sometimes they are the cremation container, more often than not they are. Sometimes they are slightly separate. Now, on average in size, these tend to average about 12 litres, except for the Marlborough bucket over in Wiltshire, which is a bit of an outlier in several respects because that is 120 litres. Quite frankly, calling it a bucket might be insulting. It's more of a vat. And you do have quite a lot of these bucket burials in Kent. The 2 main ones that you're more going to be familiar with are Aylesford. You're also going to be possibly familiar with those down at Malmone Farm or those down in Alcombe. But we also still get them, as I said, in Gallo-Belgica and also in Gaul more widely. This example here with, I presume it's cow heads. We're not entirely sure. The artistic drawing here isn't great. We think they're cow heads. But the decoration from Aylesford and from Malmone Farm tells you and shows you that the decoration can vary quite widely. We can get really big narrative art with big animal and human characters, but also they can be decorated completely just in a geometric, non-figurative style. And we haven't got a pattern as to how or why yet. How we get buckets in the archaeological record can vary quite enormously, from wonderfully complete things like this to bits, quite frankly, such as the other bucket from Hertford Heath. We've just got bits of the coopering bands left. But on the PAS, they mainly are represented through their often very characterful swing bucket handle fittings. Bovine ones are the most common of the period. Now, these, because of their quite realistic nature, were always assumed to be Roman and somehow associated with Mithraean contexts. Actually, they're a very late Iron Age innovation, starting about, well, mid-1st century BC, effectively. The actual handle, swing bucket handle generally, whether animal, human, or plain, is something that comes over about 120 to 75 BC. They're a definitely Iron Age invention. Well, I say invention, late Iron Age cultural item. And actually, it's really interesting because bucket handles like this, we know thanks to one that was found in a well in Leicestershire, continue all the way through to the 3rd century AD. Just because the Romans arrived does not mean that aspects of cultural imagery just disappear overnight. Some of them, and actually have an incredibly long life. And this is why bovines end up being the most popular, because of that really long life. And it's bucket fittings where we start with really important finds in Kent, hence it was important to give you that background. And the 2 bucket fittings I want to start with are those of human imagery. I apologise, I don't have better photos of these. I would love to photograph both of these if anybody could support that, in terms of just giving me the space and the time and the artifacts to do that on a trip down to Kent. That would be brilliant. So here on the left, we have the bucket fitting, which I believe now has pride of place in Maidstone Museum from, forgive this joke, I know Burton Aluff is not technically the correct location point. I apologize. It's the location that's given in Jope's millennial posthumous volumes. This is a bucket fitting, swing handle. He probably did have bovine horns. There's always been this discussion with this individual whether he had deer horns, like stag horns, like Knossos. But actually, although we have depictions of that, of Knossos type figures in France, excuse me, in Denmark, etc., we don't actually have any in Britain that are definitively Iron Age or La Tène culturally. So he was probably bovine horned. What's really interesting about this individual is not actually the head, which is actually incredibly well modeled, possibly takes some classical inspiration, which is a totally acceptable thing. We have classical inspiration from our coinage from 25 BC, so it's not unusual. What's interesting is actually there's a second head that I don't feel a lot of people have paid attention to, and he's actually down here. These are eyebrow ridges and a nasal ridge, and there are the very classic lentoid eyes. I would also like to make the point, yes, in the Iron Age, you get lentoid eyes as part of the repertoire of motifs in the depictions of humans. They are not, however, diagnostic completely. You do get a whole series of eye shapes in the La Tène period. Lentoid eyes are one of many, okay? And also some lentoid eye materials like this can happen in the 1st century AD and can be mixed culturally between Roman and local art styles. So they are not a hugely diagnostic factor on their own, despite what the literature will tell you. And so he's really interesting in that respect because we almost have a clash here of 2 art styles. We've got this, oh, well, we've got this acceptance of the slightly more classical coming in, yet it's a bovine horned human, but yet we've got this very local bit dropping in as well. And then we have something very similar here, though. This was found in Richborough Roman fort in a late 1st century AD context. This is definitely Iron Age in style and in bucket fitting type. And this is a horned human, and you will notice these spherical knobs on the top of his head. And a lot of people have wondered what these are over the years. And this is actually horn capping. Here we go. Horn capping is something that's introduced during that figurative art boom of the 1st century BC, 1st century AD. Although horn capping in itself as a practice is shared by many prehistoric cultures, in terms of La Tène art, it seems to start its boom in Galla Belgica again in that mid-2nd century BC period, and then starts coming over to Britain, the earliest example of which we have here from Baldock. Baldock from Hertfordshire has the most fantastic burial, cremation burial. Yes, it has a bucket. It probably had 2. But also it has a cauldron, the size of which you can take a bath in. It's brilliant. Go have a look at the display at North Hertfordshire Museum if you're ever that way. It's a lovely, lovely display. And thank you so much to the team there who allowed us to go and get these new images of the material. It hadn't been photographed for a rather long time. And as you can see on the left here is one of the iron fire dogs, so a piece of hearth furniture, really nice big mushroom-like horn caps. Here is the bucket. This is a human form bucket. And I know he looks like a sad jester's hat with bells on, but I promise you this is actually horns. Stylistically, we know this. And again, he has horn caps as well. Here we have another iron fire dog, another potentially early one. This one's from Cambridgeshire, Lord's Barton. And again, horn caps. There were two theories about horn caps before I did this research. One of them was that they were a bit like a Christian halo, akin to a symbol of sort of ritual status. And the other was that they were the reflection of a genuine farming practice. And actually, you can still see horn caps today. They were probably wood turned in the 18th and 19th century, but we know they were definitely used. And today you actually can buy modern, what's the word I'm after? Like resin ones. But you also get metal ones as well. If you have a look at bullfighting ring photos, practice bullfightings from southern France, northern Spain, you'll see these tiny silver spherical knobs on the ends of the bull's horns. They're horn caps. It's a several thousand-year-old practice. And when I looked to see where horn caps were used in the art in Britain, something really interesting pitched up. They were only on the nicest items of the highest status items, or on regionally specific high status items in the nicest contexts. And actually, where people have often been looking for horses as your status marker, actually capped horn bovines appear to be your economic status marker for this period, which was a big shock and a big surprise, but it does make sense. And when you again look to the Gala Belgian material, it's all very consistent. So that is what's going on here. And what's really interesting is that we can date it really, really well. We can actually now use this as a dating marker when new finds appear. So thanks to the Baldock burial, we know that this dates from about 100/75 BC. And thanks to the find from Ridgeborough here, but also a hoard with a trumpet brooch from Great Orme up in Wales, we know it ends about the time of the Boudiccan Rebellion. Which is a kind of interesting point, and something that needs to be discussed but can only ever really be theorized upon. But it is interesting that it does appear to die out pretty quickly, this horn capping, even though bovine symbolism itself doesn't, about the time Boudica goes on her rebellious rampage. It's one of those interesting coincidences, and you don't know whether to really stitch it together or to move it on. But Kent is part of this. Now, why is Kent part of this? Well, the reason Kent is probably part of this is to do where these bucket burials start and where they're also shared. And that is in Hertfordshire, the heartland of the Catavalorni tribe traditionally, so the kingdom of later Cunobelinus. And what we know is that Kent in the 1st century, late 1st century BC, early 1st century AD, is unfortunately politically really unstable, and from the coinage alone it looks like it gets invaded something like between 4 and 8 times by neighbouring regions. But one of the key neighbouring regions, and the one that seems to have had the most hold on the region in most consistently, is the Catavalorni of Hertfordshire. So the fact that horn capping is appearing in Kent, given the connections to Hertfordshire, given the comparable dating, and the fact it's going in with these fashions, is actually really not the biggest surprise. And it's not the only link we have with Hertfordshire. Here's another one. So the bucket fittings from Alcombe in Kent are really still nationally unique and really interesting. They've often been thought to be some like weird headdress, but I suspect that these fittings are actually not bovine horns, but actually caprid horns. And the only other bucket fitting we have that's a caprid is actually again from Hertfordshire. It's Harpenden. It's unique. And you may be thinking, well, those horns don't look particularly similar, do they? And you'd be right, but bear with me. Oh, a hoard from Anglesey was reported to the Portable Antiquity Scheme last year. Another of several that have come up over the years. And what's fantastic, and it ranges in date from about the 1st century AD to the 3rd century AD. But this item here, which I'm about to blow up, is one of the new caprid finds we have. And actually, when you look, apologies for that there, I'll just minimize that. When you look at the horn shape, yes, okay, they're not absolutely identical, but that twisting in on itself is actually comparable. And so this really helps me suggest that, yes, considering these objects could be 100 years apart and are obviously several hundred miles apart, this Alcombe individual is possibly, it's something that's important with caprid horns. What could possibly be important with caprid horns? Well, that's a sticky wicket of a question. And the reason it's a sticky wicket of a question is because it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We know from Caesar's writings in the Gallic Wars that the Roman, or what they recognized as the Roman equivalent of Mercury, was the most worshipped deity in in Gallic and British communities of the period. What we don't know is how much traditional Mercurian imagery, i.e. rams, caprids, corvids, was adopted or already in use by those Iron Age societies. So it could be that this is something to do with Mercury or a Mercurian equivalent deity, but we can't be 100% sure, so we just have to be a little bit cautious on our interpretation there. But again, it's another one of those links between Hertfordshire and Kent, which we don't see linking anywhere else in that kind of way. But other bovines from Kent are really specific because we only see them on cosmetic mortars, despite the fact everywhere else we've got bucket fittings, we've got triple loop brooches, we've got fittings that have God knows what purpose. We don't actually know what they're for because they're never found with their master object. Yet crescentric cosmetic mortars are the only other bovines from Kent, and the range of them in date basically covers the whole of basically it's more of a Roman period. So crescentric cosmetic mortars start in development in the 1st century BC, probably British and then exported out. You do find a few in France, decorated with a whole host of animals and humans, and sometimes just plain. And in Kent, you only get a few. I've only got 5 on record for you at the moment, unless some have appeared on the PAS more recently. They're all a little bit knackered, and contextually, they're all from about AD 43, but one of them could be as late as 450 AD. They're again one of these examples, a bit like buckets, bovine bucket fittings. They have an incredibly long life, but they are culturally a very local item. So yeah, you don't get the big other spread of bovine material in Kent at all, apart from in those very few bucket cases. And still sticking with what you see on buckets, but coming at it from a slightly different angle, you have 2 horses in Kent. This is one of them, believe it or not. And you may be thinking, my God, how can you tell that's a horse? How can you tell anything about that? It's in such a little piece. Okay, so this, believe it or not, is a triple looped fitting. What is one of those, I hear you cry? This is what it should look like. Triple looped fittings have often been thought to be horse gear, and this is unfortunately one of those awful little habits that we have, actually, to be honest, as small finds people. In the Iron Age, if it's a fitting and it doesn't have any clear contextual pattern, i.e. it's not found in graves, it's not found on the person, there's no evidence of proper wear, unfortunately it tends to get thrown into the, oh, it must be to do with horse fitting equipment pile. And unfortunately, this is one of those victims. We don't know what triple loop fittings are for. We know that in date they're very late Iron Age, but also found in the 1st and 2nd century AD context, but they are again a local culturally Iron Age item. The decoration is quite peculiar. Yes, they can be plain, but they are normally decorated with, when they are decorated, it's with humans and it's with horses, which is interesting because whenever you see humans and horses on a single item, it's an exclusive relationship you don't see anywhere else. But with triple loop fittings, you do also occasionally get bovines, but they're rarer. We don't know what these are for. And you may be thinking, well, because of this association with humans, with horses, they're a bit special. We don't know what they're for. Does that mean they're a high status item? Well, does that look like high status craftsmanship to you guys? It's one of those awkward moments. And actually, this example in Kent is a real outlier. When you look at the map here, green are those decorated with humans, grey, they're TLFs decorated with horses. Here's our one in Kent. It's really out there. And basically, I think somebody in Kent in the late Iron Age, early Roman period has seen one of these and goes, I'm going to have one of those, and has tried to make one themselves, and it hasn't gone brilliantly. There is actually at least another one, if not 2, actually, that's come from the northern region, recorded by the Durham office, which I need to add to this map. But you can see that their general cluster is very much central southern Britain. And unfortunately, we just don't know what they're for. Most of them are metal detector finds, so we don't have that contextual information to understand what their purpose or status or role may have been. And this keeps us very much with the horse theme, because when you see things like that on the right, recorded by Liverpool, you see that, you suddenly realise that objects decorated with horses are not controlled in their quality. And this really starts to make us question whether all horses, whether they're used to decorate coins or whether they're used to decorate other items of art, are imbued with this idea of kingly status. And personally, I believe symbolism on coinage and symbolism on art are cousins. They share a stylistic palette, but I believe their symbolism is specific to the material culture that they decorate. And just to make the point about horses, if we genuinely had pan-European homogeneity in art, we would have horses everywhere, right? And we just don't. Horses have the weirdest distribution map in this country. Remember, this is not coinage, this is objects. And it's this band from the Silures to sort of the Catavaloni-ish area, but mainly Atrebatian, and then you got a couple in camp. But that's buckets, so it makes sense. Buckets and triple loop fitting. It's strange. It doesn't make sense. And don't even get me started about the one in the Stanic Horde. That's a whole other rant, which if you see my Animals and Humans in Yorkshire talk, you will be very familiar with. Now then, we're coming back to horses, but we're coming at it again to buckets, because buckets are so important for the art of this period in Kent. It is literally that confined and that specialized, but it's actually really in-depth in detail in a way other areas with not very many finds, they just don't do it in the same way. We're going to be focusing on two buckets and the story that the horses or horse-like creatures tell us to finish off this evening. We're first of all going to look at the bucket that we've known about since the 1880s, the Aylesford bucket, which is in pride of place at the British Museum and has one single decorated band. And we're going to look at the decorated band, not the human heads. The human heads, very nice, fantastical, slightly Italic-like headdress, connections with Gaul. Not going to talk about that, not particularly important to the rest of the British corpus. And then we're going to talk about the absolute fun that is Lenham. There's a big change that happens with buckets. Actually, I'm just going to go back. There's a big change that happens with buckets, and it's typified by the changes we particularly see on 3 vessels only, 2 of which are in Kent, the Aylesford and Lenham buckets. The other example that sort of typifies a big change that happens is but not as well, is the Marlborough bucket from Wiltshire, which is the most figuratively decorated vessel in the country. And it's a change from, instead of just depicting a passive symbol, i.e. just like a cow head or a human head, something that has no emotion, no energy. Instead, what happens is we get the depiction of active agents in art, action in static art. And the Aylesford bucket is the first one. Now, I've highlighted these creatures in different colours, A, so it's easier for you to see them with the contrast, but B, for a very other important reason. This book has been known about for a long time, but it wasn't until E.M. Jope wrote about it in 1983 that something slightly more unusual was sort of realised. And when you look at these horses, you be completely forgiven for understanding or for thinking that this was a pair of horses, possibly 2 stallions, being depicted fighting over, as if they were fighting over a herd of broodmares. Very typical behaviour, right? Except those of you that know horses, and maybe even those of you that don't work with them, could look at those legs and go, anatomically, they don't look great. They don't look particularly good. And you'd be absolutely right. Anatomically, they are all wrong in all sorts of ways. And then you've got this hole in the shoulder here. And then you look at the very non-hoof-like feet. And E.M. Jope, as I said, in 83 was the first to point this out, and I think he was absolutely spot on. What we're seeing here are not 2 horses in the field as if a still life. These are individuals prancing about in horse costumes. These are human legs with very bendy human knees with human feet. The hole here is because they're not a one-man horse costume, they're a 2-man horse costume. Yes, the pantomime horse is potentially 2,000 years old as a concept in a way we never really thought we would ever know. Bit of a surprise. And it would also explain why aspects of the horses here look very abstracted, yet there's this attempt at anatomy. Are these costumes made from different materials? Like, are these feathers, for instance, that are being used as kind of embellishments on these costumes? So what we have on this bucket is not the recording of horses, not the recording of stallion behavior. We potentially have the recording of a theatrical scene from something to do with this person's life, potentially, because buckets are very personal objects. And it was chosen to go in the ground to contain the cremated individuals of the person it was buried with. And it's just such an unbelievable change, and we don't know what the catalyst for that change is. Again, we can't just rush and think, oh, it has to be to do with the Romans. These are definitely 1st century BC, absolutely 100% very local things. Closest ideological connections are other Latin communities in Belgium. This is very unlikely to have anything to do with Rome. This is something very different going on. And it's absolutely wonderful. And yeah, all hail E.M. Job for that one. And finally this evening, because I apologize, I don't know if I've ever run because I can't see a timer. Finally this evening, we're going to talk about the most recently discovered bucket in Britain that is decorated in this manner. And that I was very, very lucky to see when it went to the FLO office in London, where it went to go be processed. At the time, however, I'd only just started my PhD. So quite frankly, I was a fat lot of use, because as much as I could look at it and go, ooh, and ah, and wonder at it like everybody else, I couldn't do a lot of interpretation at the time because I hadn't done a lot of the work. But now I've done the work. So now we can explore the mentalness that is the Lennon bucket. And just to help you see what's going on here, I'm just going to highlight the figures. The crazy colors help. What we have here are 2 hippocampi, so hippocampus, half horse, half fish. Also in early Irish and other Welsh medieval literature, kelpies are sort of equivalents. Pulling apart a hare. I know it's a hare, so a leopard, a rabbit hare family individual rather than a deer. A, because of the ear, but B, on the other surviving band, a little bunny tail is there that just helps with that identification. And at the back of it, having a bad hair day, is a kind of long-legged crane-like bird. What on earth is going on here? I might hear you cry. Is this really Iron Age? Like, what is going on? And this, and it's an active scene. And, you know, these hippocampi are mythical creatures. So I'm going to presume that this scene is symbolic rather than literal. So what on earth could this symbolism mean? What on earth could it represent? Well, let's explore this. Let's look at hippocampi first. Hippocampus are seen in Greek and Roman mythology, borrowed from the Greeks by the Romans. And they actually have a really nice history, because they are best known as the creatures that pull the sea god Poseidon / Neptune, that pull his chariot through the seas. And when you think of how long chariotry continued in Britain, all the way through to certainly the 1st century AD, we now know thanks to recent finds in Wales, you know, and it has a history going back to about the 3rd / 4th century BC in Britain specifically, slightly earlier on the continent. We therefore can understand perhaps how this idea of a horse pulling a chariot through the sea could work within the Iron Age mindset, particularly when we know that there is huge connections between communities on either side of the channel, not just because of boat finds and, burials like that of the Mill Hill Deal Warrior and others that have imported goods, and the Welwyn Garden City burials with imported Belgic pottery. But we also know it because Caesar complains about it. That's why he visits Britain in the first place. It's because it's annoying him to hell that the Britons keep coming over and helping out their mates. And so the idea of potentially a hippocampi representing some sort of traveling through the sea or a sea-based aggressive force is not a completely alien one. But here's the really interesting thing. Hippocampi are seen on insular coinage. Now, by insular coinage, I mean here that insular in art style, even though the symbol itself is borrowed from Roman art in this instance. There's only one example of a classical hippocampi. And what's really interesting to point out is that Latin art, yes, it has a big insular history, but actually from its history in Europe from the 5th and 4th centuries BC, it always borrowed from other art styles, as did Hallstatt art preceding it. So this idea of borrowing motifs and adding it into the corpus is a totally natural thing. And when you look actually at the coins and where they come from and who uses the symbol, you do see it on Kentish coinage later on, although potentially up to 50 to 100 years later than this bucket. Is the use of these symbols on these coins relating to this particular event that this bucket may be representing? Let's have a look a bit further. The crane-like bird is a bit more difficult. We do have birds in Britain. They're the 3rd most common animal we see depicted, but most of what we see depicted are ducks. In fact, post 50 BC, everybody goes a little duck mad. It's a bit like having one of those rubber duck shops that you see in certain cities. It's kind of that situation almost, except they're bronze. And so we can't parallel this bird. In fact, it's the only bird in Britain also depicted with its feet, of all things, which is just nuts. There's otherwise quite a foot phobia when it comes to birds in the Iron Age, and I'm not entirely sure why. Anyway, crane on a bad hair day. We do have parallels. And the parallels actually come from all over the place in Europe, Eastern Europe as well as Western Europe. Here particularly is an excellent example of a crane-like bird from an Iron Age helmet of the 1st century BC from Slovenia. But we also notably have these crane-like birds on a couple of swords, and I think on a plate. I think it's another helmet decorative plate. I can't quite remember, from France as well, slightly closer to home. And we do also have birds on weaponry from Britain. Here is an example of a long-beaked water bird. I mean, there've been these particular birds from this sword that was dredged up in the 1800s. They've been called mergansers. They've been tried to be interpreted as a specific species, and sometimes you just have to give up on that one. You can't always get the detail, but what's important is that it's once again clearly a long-beaked, possibly wading species bird, once again on a weapon. And here's the really cool thing, or really just a heart-destroying thing, depending on where your loyalties lie. There's this big notion about porcines being the epitome of warrior symbolism. In Britain, we have more birds decorating weapons and martial equipment than there are porcines. Now, we are talking about small sample numbers, whatever we look at, but the fact is that actually there's a really important association between birds and weaponry, and it's hardly explored or discussed whatsoever, because unfortunately we have this preoccupation and this old idea stuck in our heads, but the data is telling us something different. So we can once again suggest from this analysis that this crane-like bird is also possibly another symbolism of a warrior or aggressive unit, identity, agent. And then we come to the poor hare. Yeah, the poor hare, who is basically being ripped apart. I mean, I didn't even know that hippocampi were technically carnivorous, but then I suppose when you look at how many victims kelpies had in early medieval literature, it kind of makes a bit more sense. We do get hares and rabbits early, some sort of 1st century BC AD, more likely AD, particularly this one from Northamptonshire. I call the Maltese a bunny. For those of you that like those particular snacks at Easter, you'll know why. They're very uncommon. We don't understand their use very well. We've got a few examples out in Europe, and again, they're much rarer. But the thing that I can't help but think about on this is that you've got essentially an animal that is a prey item, a prey animal, that is hunted both by other animals and is quite low in the food chain, but also hunted by humans, potentially for meat and for the fur. And it's this prey animal that is typically seen as sort of landlocked, although that is not strictly true. Hares will actually swim when required occasionally. It has been known, it's well recorded. And so I can't help but think that this crazy scene that's going on here is potentially two water-based aggressive forces, possibly having a victorious aggressive confrontation against a poor against a third force, which is depicted quite harshly as a prey item. Perhaps the victory was so great, perhaps they were so unprepared, perhaps they were so victimized, we just don't know. It is entirely possible that this is what that bucket is representing. I can only ever hypothesize because we don't have a TARDIS. As much as I wish we sometimes had a TARDIS, it would also kind of take the fun out of it. But yeah, the storytelling of this bucket from Kent is just phenomenal and really challenged what we thought we knew about artists of this period, particularly in that figurative boom period of the 1st century BC. Very quickly, the heads of this bucket. You'll notice they're very different, actually. Although in style they're similar, the fittings themselves are different. Now, we know buckets, we know from Baldock, we know from Essex, we know from a few examples, both decorated and non. Buckets have hard lives. They're used, they're not just items that are stuck on a pedestal and oohed and ahed at. They get broken, they get damaged, they get repaired. This is the only bucket we so far have in Britain that has two similar style but completely different swing bucket handle fittings, because the damage to one must have been so severe. But what's also really interesting is that although the style is very similar, and I absolutely believe this was made by the same craftsperson, just like the style is just too good, and unfortunately I can't trace any other work of this person, but I'm sure this is the same person. It's the only item, in fact, in the whole of Britain, except for the Marlborough bucket, which is weird, so that's okay, that's decorated with two different humans. One is a non-mustachioed male with slicked back hair, the most common depiction of a Latin male you'll find in Britain. But on the right, he's got a little bearded mustache with the slicked back hair. And that is bizarre. And what it makes me wonder is how long potentially we suspect with these buckets that these heads are roughly portrait-like. We don't believe they're just deities. That's a whole other debate about what humans are portraying. I'm happy to go into, just not right this minute, but I'm happy to answer it in questions. It is possible that the humans on these buckets are possibly portraiture-like. And so it does make me wonder whether throughout this bucket's lifetime, within this person's possession, whether when it got broken, he was a few years older, or maybe that victory that he potentially had, that bucket was potentially commemorating, took him up in status in society, and the mustache was perhaps not just about seniority in years, but potentially status as well. Mustachioed males are difficult in Britain. You only really find them in southeastern England, except for the Marlborough bucket. Again, just ignore that outlier because it's explainable and earlier. But yeah, you only find mustachioed males, actually, funnily enough, again in Hertfordshire or in Kent. You don't find that, and there's one in Cambridgeshire, but it covers Caterballoni area, so it's okay. You don't actually tend to find them anywhere else in Britain. On coinage, you do. There's particularly one example or a couple of examples from the Regni in Sussex. But again, symbolism on coins and art cannot be equated directly, so we can't use that evidence. We don't know whether it's to do with seniority. We don't know if the moustache is senior in years, whether it's status, whatever. We just don't know. But it is interesting that with this bucket, we may here have a depiction of somebody's life years. So what does the art in Kent tell us? Do you know what? There might be not very many items in Kent. There may not be the wealth and depth in chronology that you see in other regions, because some regions like Wales, we have art literally from the 4th century BC onwards, same in Norfolk. In Kent, it's very much this very tight 1st century BC AD period in terms of the figurative art. And actually, despite it may only have a few items, but the items that we have uncovered in Kent over the years that have been reported so dutifully over the years really gave us a wake-up call about the role of art in politic, in life stories, and really began to give some depth to how art could be used and to those Iron Age societies that are so often primitivized, made primitive looking by Roman classical writers. And that's why I love working with the art, I think, because it really shows you that different aspect from their own perspective in a way that other sources in archaeology don't always do and can't always do, depending on what you're looking at. And so you might not have very many items in Kent, but the items you do have are not just nationally important, but items like the Lenham and Aylesford buckets are internationally important, showing just how cosmopolitan people were, but also they show connections with potentially sort of with strife, in terms of Kent has a very difficult history in the 1st centuries BC, 1st century AD, in terms of the social instability, and the way art is part of that actually tells us about where connections were made and where some stability was regained eventually. Apologies for the technical issues we've had this evening. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'm more than happy to take any questions. I'll risk turning on my video.
Reb, thank you so much. And I'm really sorry about the issues we had there at the start. I wish I'd jumped in sooner, because whatever you did, eventually it was perfect after that. So
sorry, yes, I'm now sat next to the router. I apologize for the living room is left behind me.
No, thank you. And I'm mostly sorry because of what we might have missed at the start there. So
if anybody wants any clarification, ask. I don't mind.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That is incredible research and some very stunning items that you are getting to work with there.
Thank you.
It must be
the Lenham bucket was a London day trip. It was fabulous.
Absolutely. I bet. I was going to say, it must be amazing just to be able to go in and
well, I was invited. I was invited, and it was because everybody was sort of like, oh, we've never seen anything like this before. What the hell? Like, it was that kind of like, we're stuck, and like, you're the only person that might help. And as I said at the time, I couldn't help because I hadn't done the work yet. I was just there gazing at it like everybody else. The work didn't come out till a couple of years later. So yeah, that was amazing. I'm so lucky. But mostly I deal with pictures, and I'd like to make the point actually that my COVID hit halfway through my PhD. I was so lucky that so much of my data was online because if not, it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely. I was the same. I started mine just as COVID hit, so I had a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
We've already got some questions. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat there, and I can ask them for you. Or put your hand up if you wish. I could literally sit here all night and ask you a million questions, and there are so many things that I was amazed by the Duck Mad Britain for a
Oh,
start.
Duck Mad. Oh, for God's sake, that is just but the
um,
problem is we don't find them attached to the items they decorated, so I can't tell you what the symbolism's about because I don't know because the data's not there,
there's
which
just
is like
some love
really
of ducks going
frustrating.
on.
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah.
The bears as well. The bears. I'm
One
fascinated by
bear.
the bears. Yeah,
One
but
bear.
the cremation burials in the skins and
Yeah. So Andrew Fitzpatrick did a wonderful paper in Revue de Nord, which is a French journal. You might be able to get it through his academia, I'm not sure. And it's called, the paper is called The Fire, the Feast and the Funeral, and it's about the Welwyn Garden City burials, which the Aylesford buckets are sort of related to. The sort of the half of one lot of the tradition that the other buckets in Kent are related to. So yeah, that's the paper to go read about because there's a few of them that were actually in bearskins.
yeah,
There's a
I'll
couple of,
check it out.
yeah,
And the
including
pantomime
Balder.
horse, the
Pantomime
pantomime
horse.
horse as well being
Oh,
an Iron Age invention. Oh, I love it.
E.M.
And there's
Jope wrote about that in
hippocampi.
19. Yeah, E.M. Jope wrote about that in 1983, and it's just like hidden. It's just like laid there as if people have like tried to avoid it, and I'm like, no, he's absolutely right. These are not normal. It's true, and yeah, it's mental. I love it. I love that so much.
Honestly, there's so much to pick out. Like I say, I have so many questions, but I'm going to go to these questions
Yeah.
from actual people that have joined us. Thank you everyone for sticking around throughout. I'm glad that you all stayed past that first little technical
Yeah,
issue.
I'm so sorry.
Incredible. No, no,
I
no.
promise to come back and do
In
better.
fact, yeah. Well, in fact, the first question was, is there any chance we could have a summary afterwards? Because it's really interesting but difficult to follow, which was when we
Yes,
were
of
having
course.
the
I
issues.
will. Yeah, I can do that. That's fine.
Oh, thank you so much. Charlie asked if your PhD was published anywhere so that people could read it.
Okay. I owe ArchaeoPress the manuscript. Yes, it will be published. There will be an ebook version that will be cheaper because I'm very aware of how expensive these specialist artifact volumes can be. And I felt very guilty about the idea of going to a publisher, despite most of my data technically being open access. So that's how I've tried to mitigate that. I owe them the manuscript. I am trying to get it done. I am my own worst enemy with this. I'm trying. But
So it's
you
on the
can
way.
find, it's on its way. You can find papers with snippets on my academia edu page. And if you ever can't access anything for any reason, or you struggle with something, just pop me an email. I'm quite liberal about these things.
Brilliant, brilliant. Graham asked, how did you get around selection bias when selecting the artifacts?
Okay, so it was so selection bias in what there were sort of several different types of selection bias I could have. Okay, so I focused on metalwork. I didn't actually focus on metalwork. Metalwork ended up being the predominant material because that's what survives. But where I could, I included chalk. I didn't include stone for the very important reason that dating stone figurines, human or animal, is a total nightmare. You can't just do it stylistically because they don't follow the rules. And I can tell you they officially don't follow the rules because of the projects I'm currently doing at York. Cults of the Head project. Have a look at the Prehistoric Society newsletter from summer and you'll see that. And basically I tried to include every known item from England and Wales that was definitely Latin, definitely a recognizable animal species. I naturally obviously missed some, being confined to not being able to go look in museum stores, but I tried to do a whole sample approach. I tried, and I would continue to try and do that going forward.
Cool. He also said it's interesting that the finds appear to follow the ridgeways. I think that must have been
Yeah,
followed.
they do. You do find some odd geographical things like that, but you can't. Is that also where people are detecting that is a problem with so many being detecting biases? That is one of the things that come out. So I'm always a little bit more cautious about interpreting the landscape archaeology element unless there's some contextual other stuff to go with it, i.e. excavation data. There's a lot of straight lines on the map, and being a wife of a Roman road specialist, is like, oh, are these Roman roads? And he's like, no, stop it. They're straight lines, don't equate Roman roads. And so you have to just be a little bit cautious there on that.
Of course. Yes. This one's not really a question so much. It's about one of your slides. I think the percentage of bovines, humans, and birds on
Okay.
one of the thing might have come
Yeah,
to 400.
so okay, so bovines, over half the animals depicted, well, about half the animals depicted in Latin art, Britain, which in this instance is about 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD, culturally it continues, are bovines. Birds made up for about a quarter of the whole sample, and humans made up about just less than that as well. What you've got to remember in those numbers, there are items that come up a couple of times because there are multiple items. So humans with bovine horns come up twice. I try and simplify the data, but in doing that, little mistakes creep in that I wouldn't publish. So apologies for that. So yeah, but basically in popularity, it goes bovines, humans, birds, porcines, others, equine. Oh, I did it right. Yeah, that's the order.
So would that be massively skewed if the coinage was brought in? I presume just
Oh
on.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It would be yeah. So horses are on 97% of coinage. Humans are again popular, but in some places avoided. We would have to bring in a lot of abstract stuff for the coins as well. You do get a few porcines, but not as many. Oh God, coinage. It's just such an other. And also with coinage, you have to tease out what comes from a Latin cultural background, what comes from like Massalia, like those linear potens and what they're based on, what then comes from Rome 25 BC. And if the artist isn't particularly accomplished, you can struggle to try and split that out. So it's a bit of a minefield.
Sure. This is another horses question, actually. Is Graham has said, if horses appear on coins more, could they have been the pre-coin currency and therefore nothing special? But
dates don't match, unfortunately. They're concurrent with mass production of coinage in Britain, whether that be gold, mainly gold and silver that comes in. Ignore the potens. The potens are socially, culturally a slightly different situation, and unique for the British context. So yeah, we don't know what's passing for money. There's been arguments about the idea of Bronze Age ring money and gold talks and stuff like that, but that's a whole other question. And what's interesting actually on currency, on the PAS, there's about 400 Greek and Roman provincial coins of the 3rd to 1st centuries BC, and they've always been assumed to be antiquarian losses. But I'm wondering actually, because when you look at the patterns, there's some odd patterns. I'm actually wondering, was there some currency use from these provincial other kingdoms that was actually going on? And because we just don't think always about this period as being so cosmopolitan and interconnected, are we just getting in our own way a little bit there of assessing the evidence? Some of them are going to be holiday losses, some of them are going to be antiquarian losses, but others might probably aren't.
There's quite a few turn up around the Thames, actually.
Yeah.
And also vessels, which is, again, it's one that there's always been said, oh, it's a later antiquarian loss, but they
how
turn
many
up quite a
really
bit.
are? It's yeah, it's one of those that has to be treated carefully, but deserves more treatment, if that makes sense.
Karen has asked, are the chalk figures related to this age?
Which ones? Okay,
Yeah.
so we have figurines in Britain, because human figurines from the Neolithic onwards is one of my areas I've been developing lately. The chalk figurines of East Yorkshire, which are the most famous ones written about by Ian Stead, yes, they are Iron Age. I don't know what the specific dates are, but I suspect it's 3rd to 1st centuries BC broadly. However, they're a very insular thing. I mentioned earlier in the presentation about Latin art is not the only art style that's going on when it's here. We've got stuff that's carried on from the Bronze Age, early Iron Age through, like the decoration of bone weaving combs. We've got the stuff like from Massalia as an influence that's coming in. And chalk figurines and some human figurine traditions, like those from Orkney, there's an equivalent from Maiden Castle. They are a very insular thing. And we also have insular wooden figurines that date to this period as well, that carry on their own insular styles. So yes, the chalk figurines are part of this, but are they Latin art? Do they take Latin influence? Are they just insular? They're one of these melting pots of local with a little bit of Latin, from what I've seen. The problem with the chalk figurines is how knackered they are. We also have a random, actually, we have a random chalk figurine in from a pit in Kent, thinking about it, that was written about by Miranda Oldhouse Green and somebody else. I'll try and find the paper, but that was like 1st or 2nd century AD, like Roman. But again, it's in this insular kind of, from what we understand, it's insular kind of thing. But yeah, there is one in Kent.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, just remembered that.
No, that's good. I'm so sorry, Louise. I've only just seen that your hand is up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question? If you're able to. Jacob, is she able to unmute herself?
Oh, sorry, one
Louise?
second. I'm just trying to find her on the participants. Oh,
While
here we
you do
go.
that, can I just very quickly address David Holman? David, yes, it's
Right,
the
yes, you could.
one. Oh, sorry, go on, Louise. Sorry, you're there.
Yeah, no,
I'll
there
come
you
back
go.
to David.
Now, I have just had the most bizarre phone call in the middle of that. Ian
Okay.
and Sheila Stead ringing me up to wish me happy birthday
Oh, bless. Oh.
because I was actually present on the Garton and Kirkburn digs as the assistant archaeologist. And I
Oh,
have just
fantastic.
looked up about that Kirkburn sword because I was there when it was done. The skeleton, there was no real reason given as to why he died.
Yeah.
He was a male, 1725, reasonable condition, face north-south, facing east, flexed on his back with his hands together near his chin. So that was interesting. So that, yeah, I just had to share
Perfect.
that.
Thank you. No, that's great.
Yeah, they're some of my oldest friends, and I come to see them
fantastic.
regularly. So I talk to them
That's
regularly.
lovely. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
The other thing is I'm really interested in your slide with the horns, the 2 figurines of the horns.
Yes.
One from Aylesford and the other one. What I'm interested in with that is that one of them was on a human figure and the other one was on a porcine figurine.
So, hang on a second. Right, let me try and bring up. Hang on.
Because it got a little porcine nose. So
Oh,
clearly.
hang on. Oh, hang on. Are you on about the Iron Fire Dogs?
One was from Aylesford. I don't know where the other one was from.
Aylesford.
Was it
Aylesford or Aylesford or Alcombe?
Alcombe.
Alcombe,
Yeah,
that's
it was
it.
the
Right.
one with the 2 horns on it.
Yeah. No,
one was
that is
a human, and the other one seemed to be porcine. So what I'm wondering, are they on some kind of hat?
No, it's not porcine. It's definitely a ram. Unfortunately, that's the only photo of it I have, and it does make it look porky. But no,
it's like he's got a porky pig nose.
Yeah, no, it's because he's got red enamel in his nose for God knows what reason.
But the other one is definitely human.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that one from Alcombe is definitely human.
So does that mean that the human is almost like wearing a hat?
Yes. Yeah, we believe all these horned headdresses are hats, and actually there was a recent find from Puckeridge in Hertfordshire of it's actually a finger ring, and now I was sent this to have a look at to assess it because it's nationally unique, but you can find it on the PAS database if you go and have a look. And it's a finger ring with a human, and he's wearing a horned headdress, and it's clear as day. Right. Absolutely clear as day. But it's not capped.
Have any headdresses ever been found? Because I've just been reading about the Snettisham. They've literally think they've identified possibly bits of a helmet.
Yes,
again,
that's on my reading list.
Part of that Snettisham dig.
Yes.
And it's really exciting. They've literally only the last couple of days, Floa has seen it.
Yeah.
And apparently there's only 4 helmets.
Yeah, helmets are very few in Britain. Headdresses, in terms of that, there is one. I don't know if it's Mill Hill. Mill Hill, you've got the crown thing, which is strange because the art doesn't fit our typologies, and that there's lots of other problems with Mill Hill that hopefully are being rectified through the Comios project, Ian Armitt's project, the big DNA sequencing and burial project at York. So there's that one. I know earlier Iron Age headdresses in Europe or what look like remains of headdresses. There are a few, but not any more that I know that are preserved in Britain. We have the Ceredigion helmet. There's the jockey cap from the Thames. There's the other horned thing from the Thames. That's actually not Iron Age, possibly. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. Yeah, and then this potential Snettisham business, which I'm yet to read up, so I can't quite go into that one, I'm afraid. Waterloo helmet, thank you. I think that's the one I was missing, but I can't quite remember the date on the Waterloo one.
There's one thing I would like to ask.
Sorry, Louise, I'm going to have
Craig,
to jump in.
will this be available?
This
Because
talk,
when I go up to Ian and Sheila, I'd like them to see this talk.
yeah, absolutely. It's going to go online in a few weeks. We will post this to our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, Louise. Thank you for those questions. Reb, I'm going to jump you onto these questions because I can see the clock's ticking and people are still very keen to know more. And you are.
It's okay. There's no time limit.
So we're going to go on to this. The question from David Holman. There's an excellent example of horn capping on the reverse of a Kentish bronze coin.
So although I wasn't meant to look at coinage, of course I've looked at coinage because I can't help myself. It's like I wasn't meant to look at humans, but I looked at humans anyway. Yes, David, you're absolutely right. And it is the only coin in Britain that's got it. And it drives me nuts, though, because when you look at all the other examples on ABC, there's some variation in the die designs. And it drives me even further nuts. But what's really amazing about that one as well as the date, is the fact that on the back of it, it's got a bear. And it can't help but think about the Baldock burial with the horn capping and the bearskin. And is it all related, or is it just a bit too true? And this is where we've got the issues of not understanding the context of coinage imagery to what's going on the ground, often because dating coins can be a pain in the backside, unless you're a genius like David with cantilinear potins and you can get it down to a fine art.
So as soon as you mentioned horn capping, my immediate thought was the Waterloo helmet, because I've looked at that thing a million times and seen those little mushroom ends on the end of it and thought, is this, are they attaching something to this? Is it what's going on there?
Okay, so culturally, that thing, it drives me nuts. You see, I don't think I've got theories about this, but I'm not going to mention them in case I upset someone. But the Waterloo helmet does require further looking at. Horn capping as a cultural practice, you see it all over the world in various guises, not just in modern traditions. I believe you can see it in Bronze Age. In fact, I know you can see it in Bronze Age Scandinavia. What I haven't yet worked out is how it gets from Bronze Age Scandinavia to La Ten Art Europe. That's the.
Is it something that's just on the artistic representations, or is it something they're doing for the animals themselves?
We believe it genuinely reflects farming practice, and there's probably the reason we're probably not seeing them is because they're not surviving the archaeological record, because they're probably made from turned wood like they were in the 17th and 18th centuries in Britain, AD. That's why we think we're not seeing them. There is one potential odd bronze spear that's in Joke, and is it from Kirmington? It's either Lincolnshire or Scotland. I apologise. I can always find the reference. And that might be a fragment of one, but we're only ever going to be able to hypothesise because of a lack of data.
Sure. How fascinating. Charlie has asked on the horns topic, the Waterloo helmet, obviously, we just talked about, also the cork horns.
Yeah, cork horns. Yeah, I've not looked at Ireland because Ireland needs its own separate cultural thing. They are horns, but I don't believe they're capped. They don't have that really specific spherical end to them, which is what I would define them as capped horns specifically. But whether they've got the same spread, the same cultural, social, economic symbolism in Ireland, whether they've got the same in France or Belgium. In Belgium, they probably do, because I believe that's where our traditions derived from, the British traditions derived from. But Ireland and Scotland, I would like to take in their own, without trying to be too, without trying to let modern geographical boundaries skew things, but they need looking at within their own archaeological contexts, because the data from England and Wales has now shown how important that is.
Charlie has also asked, do you have any opinion on the triple-horned bovines?
Okay, they definitely exist in Europe, and they are probably related to a very similar thing. There's probably an extra ritual aspect, judging by where some of them come from, particularly the ones in Germany. Interestingly, you also get a chest frame. It is Germany, and it's birds that have then been given bovine horns and caps. like eagles, but then given bovine horns and cats. So you do get a little bit of a transference of that imagery in Europe. So, but I've not seen I think there's only one semi-convincing British example, and the others I'm just not sure about. You know, we're just gonna have to. I have no problem in saying we don't know, right? I think it's something that we don't do often enough.
Sure, definitely.
And so I will sit on the fence where necessary.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think that is us for questions. Reb, thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
was
Thank you so much
incredible.
for persevering. I'm so sorry for those technical issues, but any questions that come up after, please just pass them on by email. I'll be more than happy to answer them. And thanks so much as an audience for tuning in, and thank you so much for your questions.
Brilliant. I mean, we've got so many thanks coming in, and if anyone wants to contact Reb, you can get in touch with us at the Society, and we can pass on your messages or however we can do it. So thank you all for attending. What an amazing talk, what amazing research, and I look forward to hearing more in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not actually doing any of it at the minute, but I'm doing something completely different right now. But so it's kind of weird to come back to it. But yeah, if you're interested, I'm doing an Animals and Humans in Yorkshire talk next month on the 11th of February via Zoom. That's for CBA Yorkshire, so Council of British Archaeology Yorkshire. And next month then next month I am also doing, in fact, it's in 2 weeks, Sussex Archaeological Society via Zoom, porcines in Sussex, if anybody's interested.
Well, thank you.
No worries.
So as I mentioned earlier, if anyone's not a member and they fancy it, please do think about joining us. Works out about £3.30 a month, and you'll get our journal for the most current historical and archaeological research in the county. You'll receive our biannual newsletters, exclusive access to our collections, conferences, selected events, opportunities to get involved in excavations and research projects, and everything Kent heritage based that you can ever dream of, we can offer. We have lots more coming up. So please keep your eye out for upcoming talks. I'll flash through them really quickly. Thursday, the 21st of February, we've got David Brownrigg bringing us a presentation on aerial imaging to record and view archaeological excavations in space and time. On the 27th of February, it's a little bit different. This is actually at Maidstone Museum. I will be giving a talk live in person randomly about pirates. So two pirates in particular, Francis Drake and Henry Morgan, but also covering a brief history of piracy with lots of familiar faces, I'm sure. It will focus mainly on my personal adventures and often amusing experiences researching those pirates, and we'll have some intriguing mysteries actually. So you should come along if you want to. It's £5 entry. It's all run through Maidstone Museum, so have a look online for that. Most importantly, included in your ticket price is rum. Lots of rum and snacks, and hopefully lots of fun. So if you fancy it, come along to Maidstone Museum, 27th of February. Thursday, the 20th of March, Janice Thornton will be talking to us about Sheppey munitionesses. Sorry, I always struggle with that. Mouthful of a word there. Munitionesses. Women in the Sheerness dockyard in World War I. That'd be amazing. Thursday, the 17th of April, Dr. Martin Watts will deliver his talk, Richborough, the Secret Port. And in May or June, we are going to hear a talk from Dr. Emily Stameti-Campbell and Giselle Curele about their work in inclusion in archaeology, including the positive activities of the Enabled Archaeology Foundation and Operation Nightingale. Check the website for more details on these talks and a wide range of other Kent-based events, and how to become a member if you fancy it. And that is all for me. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Reb. You're amazing. That's brilliant. Take care, everyone. Have a good night, and we will see you all next month for our next talk. Good night.